We're taking a deep dive into ProCreate 5 in order to create an animation from start to finish.
TipTut.
Hello everybody and welcome back to TipTut. Today we are inside of ProCreate and we're going to take a look at how to create an animation from start to finish. This is going to be a 3-part series. This first part here is going to deal with people who aren't familiar with the ProCreate interface. So we're not actually going to get to animating this episode. Therefore, if you're already familiar, I suggest you start with episode 2. Or if you're unfamiliar, I suggest watching this one for a quick overview or watching my full intro to ProCreate video instead if you really are a truly beginner and you want a detailed, slow take on how to work inside ProCreate. For anyone else though, just carry on, or if you fancy a quick refresher course, you might as well watch this video as well. So without any further ado, let's jump right into it. You can see now if you've got the latest version of ProCreate 5, you're going to see this interface here where we've got animating frames along the bottom of the ProCreate interface. And we can create ourselves little simple animations using all of the same brushes, textures, and techniques that you usually will be able to inside of ProCreate. I'm going to show you how to create something similar to this one. But first things first, like I said, we're going to go through how ProCreate usually works. So you're probably going to be on your iPad desktop like this, and I pop ProCreate inside a folder. So we're going to open that up and it'll drop you into this gallery style page. Now you have select, import, photo, and plus. Those are pretty obvious what they do, but we're just going to hit plus and it's going to bring up a selection of canvas options for us here. I'm going to create a new canvas option for this one just because it's a complete course. 1080 by 1080 is totally fine. DPI is dots per inch. That's basically how many pixels you're going to cram into the same amount of space. 72 is usually the standard for screens, but lots of screens these days have higher DPI ratings, such as this iPad that I'm on. So I'm going to leave that on 150. You can see that editing this value here does nothing to affect your maximum layers. But if I were to increase my canvas size, that would reduce the amount of maximum layers that I can have inside of my document. Honestly, 250 is way too many for this document, but that's totally fine. We're going to do this in pixels as opposed to millimeters, centimeters, or inches. And the color profile we're going to choose is just sRGB, which is standard red, green, blue for digital displays. You can leave the time-lapse settings as they are, but if you want to, you can increase the quality and size of these, and you can affect the canvas properties such as default background color and whether or not that's hidden. So let's create ourselves a new canvas then. You see it's going to drop you directly into that canvas. What I'm going to do though, however, is go straight back to the gallery and tap on the name here to give this artwork a name. And we're just going to call this animating part 1. There we go. Useful to make sure everything is always named inside your projects. So you can see that you can zoom in and out from the canvas by pinching with your fingers like so. And a quick flick inwards will resize your canvas to your full screen size. Up here in the top left, we have our manipulation menu. That's where we can edit things like the canvas settings and sharing settings, which we'll go into detail a bit later. You can do adjustments to your artwork, like adjusting the opacity, hue, saturation. Again, we'll go through that. The selection tool, where you can do different types of selecting your artwork, such as automatic, freehand, drawing rectangles or ellipses, that sort of thing. Again, we'll be using that as we go through. And then you have your selection and move tools where you can move around artwork that you've already drawn on the canvas. And up here you have your tool panel. Now you can start off with the brush panel here. You can see you have different options down the side. Calligraphy, touch up, sketching, inking, all with a load of default brushes. You have your smudge tool as well as your eraser tool and your layers palette. That's probably the most important one. If you tap on this little circle icon in the top right, it brings up your colors where you can manipulate them via disk view, classic view, harmony view, value view, or palette view. And creating a palette's really easy. You can just tap the plus button to add a new palette, and whichever color you have selected, you can tap again to create and add colors to that palette. Swiping left or right, swiping right usually brings up more options such as share, delete, modify, duplicate, etc., etc. But the ProCreate interface is really, really easy to get a handle on. So I'm going to set this gigantic palette here as my default, and I'm going to go over to disk view, just so I like using this interface for my color. Now, we're going to create some new layers, and we're just going to do a sketch of our little flower here. So first things first, I'm going to go to my brush palette. I'm going to go to the sketching menu here and I'm going to grab some kind of pencil. I'm just going to choose the ProCreate pencil here. These two sliders increase the brush size and brush opacity or see-throughness of your brush. So I'm going to leave the opacity on 100, but I'm going to bring the size down to about 15%, which will give me a nice thick pencil line. Now, I'm just going to start drawing. So you can see just drawing is quite natural with the pencil, like so. Tapping with 2 fingers will undo and 3 fingers will redo. Very useful. Swiping down with 3 fingers can bring up your options menu. Cut, copy, copy all, cut and paste, etc. Tapping on the eraser brings up the eraser brush menu. So it's oftentimes useful to make sure your eraser is on the same brush as you're painting with. And of course, if you're on the eraser, you can just erase like so. To quickly get rid of everything on a layer, however, you can tap that layer and just hit clear. Now we're going to go through all of these options, so don't worry too much about that for now. So I want to make sure that my drawing is symmetrical and well balanced. So what I'm going to do is actually go up here and use our first tool. I'm going to come down and underneath Animation Assist, which we'll get to later, trust me, I'm going to turn on my drawing guide. Now as a default, that comes up as a grid. But what we want is the symmetry guide. So I'm going to edit the drawing guide here, go down to the options along the bottom and just hit symmetry. Now I can manipulate and change this symmetry guide. And what it means is basically anything I draw on the left-hand side of this line is going to mirror on the right. You can tap the top here to click reset, and that will bring it back to the middle. You can also tap any of the other points, or you can bring up the options and change to radial or quadrant, or indeed vertical symmetry. I'm just going to choose vertical and hit done. Now that's created our guide, and by default under the layers palette here, you can see that there is now a word assisted underneath, and that means that anything we draw on this layer is going to be symmetrical. We can turn this on and off on the fly by just tapping the layer, and that can be useful if you want to just quickly do something in your design which isn't going to be symmetrical. For now though, let's leave it on and we'll start drawing. First thing I want to do is draw my pot. So I'm going to draw just a rough semicircle and I'm going to leave my pen on the canvas when I'm done. That's going to activate shape creation mode, and as you can see that takes my somewhat smooth line and turns it into a perfectly smooth line for us, which can be really useful. I'm then going to draw directly down. And you can see symmetry mode is still on. And I'm going to draw a nice smooth curve here. Like so. Bit of a thick line. So we can come through with our eraser tool, which will reduce to the same size. And we can just neaten that up. So for our pot, we do want it to be perfectly symmetrical. So I'm going to bring this down and leave the symmetry tool on the entire time. Again, this at the moment, the layers we're doing are just our rough sketches, so we don't have to be super duper careful with these. I'm also all going to do it on one layer as well. And when we get to coloring later on, then we are going to separate out into different layers for us. Seems a little bit big at the moment though, so I'm going to grab my movement tool here. And I'm going to scale this down, making sure that the uniform tab is selected here, sorry. And that means that when I scale, it's going to maintain its shape. If it was on freeform and I scaled, it would be all sorts weird, which is not what we don't like. So uniform mode, and just scale that down slightly. I'm going to bring it back to the middle here, so it's still symmetrical. I go back to my brush tool now, and I'm going to start drawing in some leaves. I think we'll have these leaves be kind of like this. Nice big, chunky, cartoonish leaves. And underneath that, I'm going to have to draw in the soil of this pot here, as well as the space for the stalk of our plant as well. Now I've accidentally started coming out a little bit there, so we'll just rectify that. It's a bit of a chunky stalk, so let's maybe bring that in just a little bit and erase that outer line. Okay, that looks pretty good. Now I'm going to zoom and rotate in here so I can get nice and tight and draw the head of our flower, which looks a little bit fat to me. And I don't want to necessarily erase any other parts of my image. So what I'm going to do, or modify rather, any other parts of my image. So what I'm going to do is grab my selection tool and I'm going to go to freehand mode. And I'm just going to draw a circle around this head, making sure to carefully select there. Then I'm going to select the move tool and I'm going to shrink this. So what I'm going to do is go to freeform mode instead, and I'm just going to squish that down and then bring it back into place. You can tap anywhere on the screen, which is useful if your hand's getting in your own way. to move things as well. And if you tap either side of an item, you'll move it by pixel. There, looks pretty good. So with the symmetry mode still on, I'm going to start drawing in some big chunky petals. Make sure I've got my brush tool selected. Maybe something like that. We'll have one down here too. Now, that's one way of doing it. Manually, basically. Or we can use our rotational symmetry tool. So if we come up here to the settings, go to Edit Drawing Guide. Under the symmetry options, bring up radial. We can then shift the center point of our radius to the center point of our flower's head. Click Done. We can either just start drawing or we can erase what we've done. So let's erase these petals just to show you. Actually, if I just undo all of that, there we go. That's probably easier. So undoing does retain your guides. Your guides are separate to the undo redo, obviously. So now when I start drawing, it's going to start drawing in rotational symmetry, which is really useful for us because it means we can really easily draw some cool looking petals. And in the background, we can draw some more. Boom. Look at that guy. He looks pretty cool. In fact, he looks so cool. I'm just going to edit this drawing guide again back to vertical because we're going to use that more often. He looks so cool. I think he needs some deal with it sunglasses. What a cool guy. Okay. Maybe we should have made him a sunflower. Oh well, never mind. Give him a big cheesy grin as well. Nice. Now, that looks like a cool dude to me. So that's our sketching done. Now, we've done all of this sketching on one layer. So what we're going to do is open up our other layers here. And I'm just going to click this plus button here to generate a whole bunch of layers. Now, from this point on, it's important that we start naming them. So I'm going to tap my layer again and hit rename from this context menu. And I'm going to call this one sketch. We need a layer for our pot. We need a layer for our stem. We need a layer for our flowers or leaves rather. We need a layer for the face. We need another layer for the sunglasses. And we're going to need 2 layers for the petals, but we don't want them to be on top. We want them to be under the face. We'll just call this one Petals F for Petals Front, and we'll call this one Petals B for back. Let's select both of those. Now, the quickest way to do that is just to flick, as you can see here, with the pen, and that's going to deselect and reselect things. You can group these, but what I'm going to do is just long press, and I'm going to drag them in between the face and leaves layers, and that's going to reorder them for us. So let's get to the fun bit then. I'm going to go back to my layers palette after selecting the pot layer. Go back to my brushes palette, and I'm going to choose this folder called My Brushes. Now, these brushes are just duplicates of brushes that I've found previously that I've modified slightly. So for example, under the inking menu, there is a brush called Syrup. What I did was swipe on that to hit duplicate and brought up Syrup 1. And then with a long press, I just dragged that over to the My Brushes library. Okay, you can swipe again to delete it, which is what I've done there. And I did that with a ink brush, a pencil, and a noise brush, which can be found under touch-ups. I then clicked on the brush twice to bring up its menu, and you can start editing its properties. Now, I'm not going to go into this because, as you can see, there is all sorts you can do under all these different types of menus here. Take some time to get yourself used to it. All I did, though, was take the jitter from 0 up to about 30%, which created that nice jagged line, but still smooth and inky. That's all I did. So I'm going to use that to color in the pot now. So I'm going to go up to my colors palette, and using this palette that I've got here, remember I picked Gigantic P2, I'm going to click the nice dark brown for the pot here, and I'm going to go back to my pen palette. Now I'm just going to start drawing on top of my sketch. Again, if I start drawing, it's not going to use the symmetry tool, so we do want that. So we open up our layers palette, go to pot, and we're going to choose Drawing Assist on. That means when we draw this, it's going to respect the fact that we've got a symmetry guide. Simple as that. Here's a cool way to color something in. You think you'd have to go around coloring? No, you don't need to do that at all. You can just drag and drop this color circle and release onto your pot. If you find that when you're dragging, it's overfilling, or even worse, it's leaving a gap at the edges of your sort of content here, that's really easy to fix. You just need to leave your pen on the page after dragging that dot down, and you'll see the color threshold options open up. You can then drag to increase or decrease the threshold, bearing in mind if you do it too much, it will overfill. Obviously, the cleaner the brush, the less chance that you're going to have to use that. So on top of this pot now, I'm going to add another layer here, and I'm going to rename this pot color. I'm not going to do this for all of them. And then I'm going to swipe again to select both, and I'm going to group this layer, and I'm going to rename this group pot. Okay, that means I can just hide it in a little folder. With pot color, I'm going to click it again, and I'm going to turn on this thing called clipping mask. Now, there are two options here, alpha lock and clipping mask. If I show you alpha lock on the pot layer, you'll see what I mean happens. You get a little checkered background. What that basically means is if I draw something now, content is only going to appear where there's already ink on the page. Okay. Now, if I go and turn that off, but on the layer above it, I turn on the clipping mask, that's going to do exactly the same thing, apart from the clipping mask is a separate layer, which obviously is great for non-destructive workflows. So I recommend using a clipping mask and popping that in a folder unless you know you're never going to come back to this. Okay. Now, using this pot color layer, what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to my noise brush here, which you can see brings up this nice sort of noise texture. I'm going to drag it down to about 10% size. And I'm going to create a little shadow. And that's 10's a bit small. Let's do 20% size. I'm going to create a little shadow under this rim of the pot here. I'm going to press quite hard, and I'm just going to soften it up by the time I get to the bottom of the pot. Okay, that's all I've done. Then I'm going to take my eraser tool, which I'm going to put on my syrup brush here, which I'll make sure isn't massive. What's my brush one on? My brush is on 21% for that. And it is on, 5% for my syrup. So I'm going to take my eraser and I'm going to turn my eraser syrup all the way down to 5% as well. And then I'm just going to quickly erase some of that noise along the lip of our pot. And then I'm just going to paint the rest of that away. And as you can see, quite easily and quickly there, we've got ourselves a shadow on our pot. Now, of course, that's not everything that we need. If we go to our layers palette here, we tap our sketch layer and we drag that to the top of everything. We can click this little N and reduce that layer opacity. That was just that little N there. Now, this means we can see through the layer a bit. It remains on top, and we can see all the details that we need to add. So you can see that we also need to add a bit in the background here for the back of the pot, and then a mound for the sand. Now, doing so with the eraser tool might be quite tricky. So what we can do instead is grab our selection tool here on the freehand option. We can turn the feather on a little bit if you'd want to as well. And we're just going to draw roughly where we think that path should go. If we go to the feather option, we can feather maybe 1%, and that's just going to soften that edge so that when we come in with our brush tool, which we're going to set to the noise brush here, it's going to create a nice, slightly soft edge for us there. So we're just going to gently paint in, gently, some of that content there. Now, oops, I did that wrong on the wrong layer, so I'll just quickly undo that. My mistake. And I'll pop it on the pot color layer. And you can see we'll just start drawing in that background there. Nice. Let's grab another layer on top here. Oops, I made too many there, so I'll just swipe and delete it. And I'm going to drag that above the pot color layer, and I'm going to turn clipping mask off. For this, we're going to grab our lighter color, this sort of light sand color, and we're going to go to our brush tool and open up syrup. And then we're going to just on top quickly draw in for approximation of where we want that sand to be. Now I've left that mask on so that one edge is cleaner than the others. This edge is going to be cleaner than this edge along the top here. And then when I tap this selection tool again, turn that off, we've now got a pot of soil. Selecting this, I can add a new layer on top. I can clipping mask that layer. I can grab my slightly darker color and my noise pen, and I can start adding a bit of texture and noise to that layer too. And there's our pot. Now, that's essentially what I'm going to do for the rest of this. So I'm going to speed through it a little bit quicker than I did that section then. Now, let's close down our pot layer and go to our stem. For the stem, I'm going to choose this nice bold green. I think that looks really good. I'm going to grab our syrup tool. And for this one, we're going to make sure that our drawing assist is on, because we're going to be drawing this stem down the middle. So you might as well draw less lines. Redo that because I messed up the bottom. And we'll just extend slightly past where we need to go with it. Now, I know at the moment you can't see this stem, but when we come to animate it later on, you might need to. So as a reference, this is going to be really useful. So because I know we're probably not going to need it, however, I'm going to use alpha lock on this one instead of a clipping mask. I'm going to select a slightly darker green. In fact, I might go to the green from this gigantic P1 palette instead. I'm going to grab the noise brush and I'm just going to start painting that in. I'm going to grab the mid green and pop that into the middle. And there you go. There's our stem of our plant. For the leaves, I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to grab this light green color here. I'm going to go to my syrup brush, make sure I'm on the right layer, make sure that layer has drawing assist turned on. And I'm going to draw in some leaves. Useful for when you want something to look exactly the same and exactly smooth. So I'm going to add some shading to this layer. Again, I'm going to grab this dark green here. I'm going to go to my noise brush. This one I will add on a separate layer. We'll go to clipping mask. And we'll also turn on symmetry drawing assist for this one too. So that when we darken up these shapes, we know we're doing it perfectly symmetrically. Let's go to our middle color, blend some of that in. Nice, looks good. And now I'm going to grab my original color here, this original green, go back to my syrup brush, and on this same layer with all of this blurred content, I'm going to draw back in our line there. Now what I like to do is sometimes extend this all the way to the tip, just so that it blends out completely and looks really nice. If you prefer, you can group these layers under a group called leaves. And you might prefer the look of these if they are underneath the stem, like that. Don't know how I like it. Let's go to the face then, do the face next. I know I'm going to need another layer on this, so I might as well group them first. That was just a swipe and a tap of the group. Let's rename it face. So on that face base layer, I'm going to grab, I don't know, this nice sort of peach color here. And I'm going to go turn on drawing assist. And I'm going to draw this guy's face in. I messed that up a little bit, so what I might do is use the smoothing technique by holding and shrinking slightly. There we go, you can fill that layer in, it looks pretty good. On this layer, I'm going to add a clipping mask, and I'm going to choose a slightly darker color. Go to my noise. I'm going to paint this guy's face in. Now, you might be thinking, Matt, how do I make these awesome color palettes? Well, I can't tell you because these aren't mine. The gigantic one is made by Gigantic on YouTube. He's fantastic. What I did was I imported an image into ProCreate, and then I used this handy trick where you can press down on the screen with one finger and it brings up an eyedropper of anything that's on the image. When you release, that color is in your eyedropper up here. And to add something to a palette, you can just tap like I did earlier. So that's how I built these color palettes. If you long press on one of these, you can remove it from the palette as well, just in case you make a mistake. Okay, our face is done. So on top of our face, we're going to add our sunglasses layer. Going to go and group both of those into a group called sunglasses. Boom. Let's grab a nice dark blue-gray and our syrup brush. Let's turn on drawing assist and let's do the drawing. Now, again, if you feel like I'm rushing through this a little bit, it's probably because I am, but I do have a really slow and patient intro to ProCreate course that you guys can watch instead. I'm just conscious that this video is already getting close to 20-25 minutes long, and we haven't even got to the animation yet. So that's not going to be fun for people that do know what they're doing. I'm going to grab a slightly lighter color here, and using the same layer, I'm going to turn on alpha lock. I'm just going to draw in some cool guy reflections. However, the reflections are going the wrong way because we've still got symmetry on. So I'm going to turn symmetry off for now. Draw in a nice cool guy reflection. and then turn Symmetry back on so that we can fix it later on if we need to. On top of that layer, I'm going to add a clipping mask. I'm going to grab a slightly brighter grey and my noise brush, and I'm just going to gently waft over that, which softens that up just a little bit. All right, last step is the petals then. So for this one, if you remember, when we go to petals, we're going to have 2 layers here. Petals front, petals back. So let's do petals front first. Let's do petals back first, might as well. Group those 2 layers, rename the folder petals back. And if you remember, we're going to have to switch our drawing guide to Symmetry Options Radial. Now, it hasn't remembered our previous position, but that's fine. We can just drag that back. And because it was only a guide, it doesn't matter too much. There we go. Plus, once we've finished our sketches, we're probably not going to be using the actual Symmetry tool to do the neat stuff anyway. So it doesn't matter if it's not perfect. Although I've found you can get it pretty much spot on. Let's draw in some petals. What colors should we have for our petals?
I'm going to choose a really hot pink. Why not?
Sorry about that, my GoPro overheated. So back to it. We are going to continue to draw these petals. I picked a nice hot pink color. I went to my syrup brush tool and then I started drawing away. Okay, so we are drawing the back petals first. So I'm going to make sure that even though we don't see them, I'm going to join up these petals. Okay, that's just so that, so that exactly that doesn't happen. You can see here that these petals I've just drawn didn't link. So I'm just going to bring them all into the center here. And what that means is I can drag and drop the color into those petals as I see fit. I'm going to quickly do the petals on the front as well, just for reference, so I can see that I like it all together. And these ones, obviously, we're going to want to have a slightly different color. But how do I choose what color from my palette? Well, here's a nice way. If you go down to the color harmony section of your color palette here, what you can do is click on these options up here. You can choose between complementary, split complementary, analogous, triadic, tetradic, whatever you like. And if you don't know what any of those things mean, you can watch my color theory video, which can be found on YouTube, and I will link it right now. There you go. I've linked it. You can check out all the cool ways to put colors together, but simply put, in this one, maybe try triadic. You can see that if I select my hot pink color, a nice blue or green is a good option to go with it. If I choose tetradic, it goes blue, green through yellow. And if I choose something like split complementary, it's a turquoisey green. Or if I choose analogous, which is the one that I'm going to, it's suggesting like a pinkish or a reddish color. And you can actually drag these around and see if you wanted something a bit more of a purple, it would recommend a slightly different pink here. However, I know that the pinkish purple is what I want to go for. So I'm just going to go over to my color palette, see the hot pink that I selected, and I'm going to notice some colors that I can choose. Here's a good purple. So let's try that one. I'm going to go to my petals front layer, make sure drawing assist is on. I'm going to draw some petals in front. Boom. Now that looks okay, but again, I don't think I actually like that purple color. So what I'm going to do instead is I'm going to choose a different color harmony. Perhaps we'll stick with tetradic and we'll choose our nice hot pink from our color palette here, this one. And it's recommending blue, green, or yellow. So let's pick a blue from our palette, which is close enough to it. Maybe this kind of darkish blue, would that look cool? Oh, that looks quite cool, I like that. All right, let's pick that color instead then. So we'll go with that color. Boosh, we'll start to draw these in. And you see how our radial tool here is really, really speeding up our workflow. Now that looks really cool. I quite like that. So let's go in and add our shading. This one, I'm going to go to clipping masks. I'm going to choose my darker hot pink. Maybe I'll choose this really dark hot pink. I'm going to go to my noise brush. Inside my palette, I'm going to make sure that drawing assist is on. And then I can just do a nice little from the center here. I'm going to choose a slightly lighter color and I'm just going to blend those two as we've done before. What I'm also going to do though is grab my hot pink and just go around the edges and make sure those edges aren't too overwhelmed. And I'm going to grab a really light pink and I'm just going to boop, 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 the edges there. That looks pretty cool. Let's do the same thing with these petal front layers. We'll go to clipping mask. We will grab the purple that we grabbed before. So we'll grab a slightly lighter one because I chose this color. We'll choose this noise color here. And we'll start to open up the colors. Bearing in mind that some of this is going to be covered, of course, by this little dude's face. There we go. I forgot to turn on drawing assist for this layer, so I'll just do that for the last moments. Let's go to a really light purple. And let's just do that. Now, you don't want to do too much of this because obviously when you come to animate it, you've got to do that for every single frame. So we may, in the animated version, sort of whittle that down a little bit so there's only 1 or 2 colors, just for simplicity's sake. Let's turn the face back on. And one thing we did forget on the face was his actual face. So we'll add a new layer in here. We'll grab this same color as the sunglasses and the same brush. We'll make sure that on this layer, drawing assist is turned on. Oops, not to radial though. To the vertical version from earlier. So we'll go back to Symmetry, Options, Vertical. Done. And we'll draw in a nice happy smile. Do you want it in that color though? No, I think we want it in that sort of darkish skin color there. Boom. That looks good to me. Let's temporarily turn off our guide just to hide it and take a look at what we've done. Perfect. I'm going to add in a layer at the bottom, like so, where I'm just going to grab a nice color. First off, we'll turn off our sketch. I'm going to grab a nice dark color from our palette. Maybe this blue. Is that going to look nice behind everything? Possibly. Let's see. I'm going to fill in the entire layer. That doesn't look too great. Let's go back to our color harmonies. We can choose the pink that we chose before, and it recommends yellow, green, or blue. So let's go for a nice green. Go to our palettes. Maybe we can choose this green here. Drag that through. No, don't like that either. Let's keep it nice and simple then. Let's keep it with white, but we can add in some noisy texture. I'm going to increase this from 30% for a second. And we're just going to start blending in some dark colors for the background here. Now, one way you can do this to see if there is a color that you like is you can do what I've done here. And then you can mess around with your hue saturation settings. Hue saturation and brightness. If you change the hue on this, bring the brightness down, maybe bring the saturation up, you can start messing around until you find a color that you like. Okay, so have a play with these settings, see what you think. Maybe something like that looks quite good. I don't know. I'm not super happy with it. I'm going to delete that layer, leave it as white for now. But there you go. Even guys like me get confused sometimes and don't like what they draw. So if that's what you're worried about, don't worry about it. That is enough for now though. I will grab these leaves and bring them above the petals because, or will I? Oh, I don't know. Maybe we'll grab both these petal layers. We'll group them together into their own layer and we'll shrink them down uniformly because they seem a little bit big. And then we'll reposition them. That's nice. We like that. There we go. Now I'm happy. Boom. That's it. We're done for this episode. So thank you very much for watching. Make sure you come back for part 2. Well done if you've got this far. This was a long video. And in part 2, we're going to go over animating this bad boy. Probably just for a bit of variety. In this one, you saw him going side to side. In the other one, we'll have him bounce up and down. Why not? It's the same concepts. So thank you very much for joining me. Wow, let me try that again. Thank you very much for joining me, everybody. And I'll see you all next time on the next episode of TipTut, where we're going to animate this little guy. See you later.
Remember to subscribe for more tips, tricks, and tutorials. Thanks for watching.